Hello my stitchy friends, welcome back. My name is Laura, you found Lala D Stitches, and I'm so glad you're here with me. Today our video is an update for our Pollinator SAL. We're going to talk about part 5. You guys, we're so far over halfway. It's like we're cruising downhill into the home stretch, right? It's so much fun. I'm loving it. I know that I say this every time, but I continue to hope that you're enjoying this as much as I am. Okay, so if you're new with us, our pattern is the blue flowers in praise of pollinators. It's gorgeous. I love it. And we have done, well, let me just show you. I've split the pattern up into 7 portions. And we are 4 out of 7 completed at this point. So we started in the middle, then we popped down to this corner, and then we made a flying leap over here and crossed back over here. We're just going all over the world. It's an adventure every time. So this is where we are. I'm stitching mine on a 14 count Ada that I hand dyed last year. And I wish I had written down what I did because I love it. And I would like more in this color. And I'd like to try it on different fabric bases. Anyways, that's beside the point. So we did our hummingbird hawk moth, our cute little snail, and our little blue bee, which if you're stitching with the called for DMC, as you're stitching, it'd be like, this bee is a little bit more green than blue, and that is very true, but that's okay. We're doing the best we can. Yeah. Oh, it's been so fun. I've gotten in a number of messages and emails over the last month of people who have actually seen hummingbird hawk moths in their gardens over the last month, and I think that's just magical that we've been stitching it and we learned a little bit about them, and then we're actually seeing them in action, and yay for that. Pretty awesome. So this is what we've done. Where will we go next? Well, we only have 3 corners left, so we have to fill in one of the corners. And we're gonna come down to our beautiful Monarch this month. And I'll pop up a picture of the exact outline, but really it's fill in that bottom corner. And this gives us only 2 pollinators to talk about. But I'll tell you what, my friends, I have oodles of information. So let's just, as we've done before, we'll start top down. So we'll start with the Monarch, and then we'll talk about some little pollinating beetles. And we'll just, have a little science lesson, learn a little bit. It's awesome. It's been so much fun to learn about and to do the research myself. You go through all these different sites and you try to pull the most interesting factoids, and yeah, it's been really fun. I've enjoyed it very much. So a Monarch butterfly. Here's what I found about them. They are often viewed as symbols of change, transformation, and hope. And isn't that perfect as we leave summer and we start to go through September and we're stitching on this, and the seasons will begin to change. We're moving from summer into autumn through September, and so it's kind of beautiful that we're going to be stitching this symbol of change and transformation as we begin to see that natural transformation in the world around us. Let's see. I did my numbers again. So, North America is typically what is considered home for the Monarch butterflies. There are 2 main populations divided by the Rocky Mountains. So there is the eastern and the western populations. The eastern is the largest. It goes through the central states of the United States of America. And that's really their major migration path, which we'll get to in a moment. So that's where the largest population is. But I have I found a little graphic of migration patterns, and it kind of gives you a visual of this. They are seen also, so outside of North America, they are seen in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, some islands in the Caribbean, and New Zealand. Now, this has happened in a couple of ways, that they have kind of branched out of their natural habitat, and that can be through storms. So major storm systems will actually blow them out of their migratory path, and they will wind up in new places, new homes. They also will island hop, I guess. So once they're in this new place, they still have that natural drive to migrate, so they will move around, and that spreads the populations from islands to islands. The other way is from humanity introducing them into new environments. Leave it to humans. We're awesome and terrible all at once. So their diet, as they have two different diets that change through their phases of life. So as caterpillars, they feed exclusively on milkweed leaves. And there are several varieties, natural varieties of milkweed in the United States. But they, as caterpillars, that is their nutrition source. As adults, they feed on nectar, as we kind of gathered with them being pollinators, but it's from a wide range of flowers. They don't strictly focus on the milkweed at that point, though that still remains a food source for them. Their life cycle, as eggs, they take about 3 to 5 days to hatch. Then they're a caterpillar for a couple of weeks. Then they build a chrysalis and transform for a couple of weeks, and then once they hatch, if they do emerge from their chrysalis, most adults live only a few weeks. And during their lifespans, they live to feed and lay eggs. They lay their eggs on the milkweed plant. So this becomes a very focal center point for the lifespan of a monarch butterfly. They eat it, they nest on it, they emerge from it, they're born on them, and they migrate back to them. So there are multiple, because they only live, from hatching as an egg to their inevitable death, it's only a matter of like 6 weeks or so, roughly. And so we know that there's this massive migration that happens. There are multiple generations through any like spring to end of September-ish, October-ish, early October. That's like their span of the year where you see them. But there are multiple generations of monarch butterfly through there. And it is the final generation of that season that hatches and becomes the spectacular migration that we see in the fall. So let's talk a little bit about their migratory patterns. So in spring, they leave their overwintering home in Mexico and they migrate north into Texas and the southern plains of the United States. They can go as far north as the Great Lakes region. And then we have our several generations of butterfly as this happens. And when we get the birth, if you will, of the last generation from September to October, they commence their reverse migration from as far north as the Great Lakes regions back down to the overwintering grounds in Mexico. And what's amazing about this is that there are new generation of butterfly. They have never been to Mexico. In fact, the ones in Mexico might not even make it back to the Great Lakes. They may never have been to the Great Lakes region in the first place, or the Central Plains. But they are born with an innate compass that directs them and compels them to migrate this path every single year. So if you were born in the northern end of the migration, they just naturally, and it's almost a straight line, they just like beeline down to the overwintering grounds in Mexico, and the reverse when they come back, which is fascinating. It is so cool. These tiny, delicate little creatures have this complex, compass within them. I think it's amazing. Florida is a major stop for a lot of the migration for like resting before they will come, and they'll literally cross the Gulf Coast. Yeah, which is amazing to me. That's an immense space. The average single monarch will travel hundreds to thousands of miles in its lifespan. And yeah, I don't know. They're just amazing. So, couple last interesting things. So, and I've gotten all of my facts for monarchs this time from the National Wildlife Foundation. So something that surprised me, because I think of endangered species, if you will, and these aren't quite endangered, but I mean, I feel like they're on the verge of it. Monarchs are one of the last creatures I would say, oh yeah, monarchs are endangered. But it turns out monarchs face habitat loss. And the population of monarchs has decreased 90% since the 1990s, which just blows my mind. I remember being a kid. I grew up in Eastern Washington. So, we're definitely part of this smaller population of monarchs. And it wasn't like you saw them in mass, but I remember at least, seeing them a handful of times, and not just one or two butterflies, but, a collection of them, if you will, a grouping of them. I remember they were part of my childhood. Like, I remember seeing monarchs. So it's shocking to me that since, my 80s, 90s childhood, we've lost that significant portion of the population. This can be, so the habitat loss is partly because grassland ecosystems have been lost to intensive agriculture. Some of it is due to urban development. There is also, they're delicate, right? They're butterflies. So pesticides and herbicides can kill both the monarchs and poison the plants that they eat. And then, of course, as is ever a conversation these days, climate change. It's, undeniable that the Earth goes through natural cycles, and those are in full swing right now. And so the altering of weather patterns, the storms themselves that are getting more violent around us, and just temperature swings, right? Like so many things. But the storms specifically can damage the migrations of monarchs. They can, die on the way to where they're trying to get. But there are things we can do to help. So I know last month when I was doing my research, I was uncertain how to help the sweet blue bee we talked about, because it doesn't live in particularly urban areas. Like, it's a specific little bee in a specific little ecosystem, and what do you do, right? We all want to help, but what do we do? So I was like, okay, how can we, is there a way we can help the monarch butterflies kind of rebuild their population? We can't necessarily we cannot change the weather. We cannot, do so many things are out of our control, but we can plant pesticide-free monarch habitat gardens, including native milkweeds. And this is, as I learned, a specific thing to look up regional guides to figure out if you're in the North America region, figure out what milkweed plants are actually natural to the area, and plant those locally native species. There is a species in Southern California called tropical milkweed that is used a lot in gardens because it's beautiful, it grows really easily, it has a pretty flower, and the monarchs actually love those. But the problem with the tropical milkweed specifically is that it doesn't have the same natural cycle as like local milkweed varieties through the Great Plains have. And because they grow continuously, there's not a hard season change in Southern California like you would experience in Oklahoma or Nebraska or something like that. So it encourages the butterflies love them, but it encourages them not to migrate. They wind up kind of hanging around instead of doing their natural cycle, and it doesn't sound like that would be a bad thing, but it turns out it makes them susceptible to disease and other complications. The migration itself is a natural cycle, and they're supposed to do it. They are born to do it, and so if you have the tropical milkweed is not bad, but if you have it in your garden, what the conservationists recommend is that in the fall, so late September time, that you cut it down so that you take away that source in what would be a natural cycle. And it's not like you're killing your plant, you're just trimming it down, right? Like, that will encourage the butterflies to move on and to go down to Mexico to their overwintering grounds so that natural cycle can continue. Yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool, like some practical help for people who live in the migratory path of these beautiful creatures. And it was really fun looking at pictures of them because they really are gorgeous. They're really beautiful. So, monarch butterfly. It's a big piece of stitching, but I think it'll be a really rewarding piece of stitching. Lots of details, lots of prettiness. So, our last little critter is our little beetle down there. And I believe it is some variety of rose chafer beetle, but I couldn't find, I don't have any specifics, and I couldn't find, like on the pattern, it's just called beetle. So, instead of looking up one specific variety of beetle, the pictures I'll show you are predominantly rose chafer beetles, because they're prettier. Some of the beetles are creepy, but they're important. So we're just going to talk about pollinating beetles in general. So, beetles are the oldest known pollinators on our planet. Like, full stop right there, right? That's a pretty huge statement. But we have evidence through fossilization that they have been pollinating and on the earth and pollinating for 250 million years, approximately. Which is spectacular. That's a huge amount of time. They are foundational, right? At that point. My notes are a little screwy on this one, sorry. So, there we go. So scientists long thought that beetles only took part in the pollination of non-flowering plants, but it has in the last 30 years been found, fossil evidence has shown that pollination by beetles has happened on a variety of water lilies dating back to about 99 million years ago. Again, all approximate. My source for this was the U.S. Forest Service website. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. That, I mean, they've been doing it a long time. They've got this down, right? So then my curiosity was piqued, and I was like, okay, so beetles have been doing this a long time. There are a lot of kinds of beetles out there. How many kinds of beetles are there, right? So it turns out 40% of all insects on the earth are beetles. And of those 40% of all insects across the globe, there are over 77,000 species of beetle that pollinate and are believed to pollinate about 90% of the planet's, I can't read my own handwriting, the planet's flower species. So 40% of the bugs are beetles, and 77,000 species of those bugs pollinate 90% of our planet's flowers. Or they participate in the process, right? They are part of that process for 90% of the planet's flowers. So they're huge. It turns out they're not as effective as a bee or a bird or some of the other critters that we've talked about, but they do, in their own way, and through probably just the vast quantity of workers available, a really kind of major part of the planet's pollination. They are the largest and most diverse pollinators in the United States specifically. So, I mean, which makes sense just in sheer numbers alone, right? That would be the stats. They're especially important to a few ancient species of flowering plant, such as magnolias. They're actually one of the primary pollinators of magnolias. Some other important crops that beetles help pollinate are carrots, sunflowers, cabbage, some apples, and a lot of different spices. So, all that good flavor we get in our food and apple pie, we can thank the beetles. What is next? Okay, so their pollinating process is called, let's see if I can pronounce this right, Cantharoff. Nope, I can't. I even practiced saying this. I'm messing it up. Cantharily. I don't know. It's very fancy. But what this process is actually a lot of beetles have very fine hairs on their backs. As we've kind of found with a lot of the insect pollinators, is that they have very fine hairs, and the pollen collects in the hair and then transfers from bloom to bloom and variety to variety that way as it falls off in new places. Okay, research has shown that some beetles, this is cool, some beetles are capable of color vision, which is really interesting. Not all animals or insects see color, but there's some evidence to support that. Not for all varieties, but some. But despite that, beetles actually rely on their sense of smell for pollinating, for feeding. They follow the scent of the flowers. That's almost it. So, while not as pretty or as noticeable as butterflies and bees, they're still very important. They have this big role to play, and they may do it in their own special less effective way, but they still keep doing it. And maybe that's a very industrious lesson for us all. That we all have our own way of doing things, but we have an important role to play. And so, yeah, that's what I've got for you on our pollinating beetles and our beautiful monarch butterflies. I remain so grateful that you guys are participating in this and joining me in this fabulous stitch. I hope you have a marvelous September, and I will be back on the 30th with our next section. We're getting there, you guys. This is so much fun. Take care as always, and happy stitching.